the summer of 1940, a few minutes could decide whether fighter pilots met a raid over open water or over their own airfields. Those minutes were created not by a heroic shout, but by a system. Radar stations gave the first warning, and observer reports filled the inland gaps. Filter rooms cleared the overlap, controllers passed the picture forward, and squadrons launched before the bombers reached their targets. Command and control is what happens when information arrives early enough to change fate. That is the core mystery of this story. How did human beings build a chain that could see farther than the eye, think faster than the courier, and act before the moment was gone? Because for most of history, command had a hard border. It stopped where sight, sound, and certainty ran out. Early armies had fires, drums, horns, flags, and messengers. They could coordinate movement, but only locally and only so long as smoke, weather, and terrain cooperated. In late 18th century France, Claude Chapp's semaphore towers relayed messages across long distances in minutes. To anyone used to waiting on horses, it must have felt suspiciously unfair. Yet semaphore was still a fair weather miracle. Night, fog, and hills kept reminding everyone that distance had not really surrendered. The deeper lesson was becoming clear. Command was not just about issuing orders, but about building a reliable way for information to travel, be understood, and become action. The electric telegraph changed command because it separated authority from physical movement. An order no longer had to move at the pace of a rider or a runner. In the American Civil War, signalers using flags and military telegraphy helped commanders connect field forces to much larger networks of reporting and decision. Messages were no longer isolated acts of communication, but parts of a larger system. That also meant the people behind the commander were becoming part of the weapon. Maps, logs, relays, and reporting routines began to matter almost as much as boldness in the saddle. Industrial war made that shift unavoidable. Once railroads, larger armies, and longer fronts arrived, timing stopped being a luxury and became survival. World War I then enlarged the problem with brutal honesty. Armies depended on field telephones, switchboards, wire teams, runners, lamps, motorcycles, and pigeons because no single method survived every battlefield condition. That patchwork was not evidence of backwardness. It was an admission that modern command needed layers, backups, and redundancy long before anyone gave those ideas sleek acronyms. A perfect order that arrives after the decisive moment is not command. It is administration wearing a military costume. Radio changed tempo again because control could move with forces instead of waiting for wire to catch up. Units could be redirected while still in motion, which was a rather impolite thing to do to the old timetable. World War II pushed that change into a new form. In Britain's air defense system during the Battle of Britain, radar, observer reports, filter rooms, operations rooms, and fighter control were tied together so information could become interception before raids arrived. The brilliance of the Dowding system was not radar alone. Its power came from organizing many imperfect reports into a usable picture and sending only the needed decisions down the chain. That was the real turning point. Command and control stopped being only about sending messages and became a continuous loop of sensing, interpreting, deciding, and directing. This changed what commanders depended on. They were no longer relying only on what they personally saw, but on a picture of reality assembled by many hands and devices. It also introduced a permanent problem. The more information a system can gather, the easier it becomes to lose focus inside of abundance. The best systems did something harder. They distilled chaos into clarity just long enough for judgment to matter. After the war, Norbert Wiener gave language to something many practitioners had already learned by experience. Cybernetics described control and communication through feedback. The principle was simple, even if the vocabulary liked to wear a lab coat. A system senses reality, compares it to a goal, adjusts, and then checks again. In command and control, that logic suggested something bold. Sensing, communication, decision support, and response might be tied together fast enough to shape events while they were still happening. One of the clearest early expressions of that ambition was SAGE, the semi-automatic ground environment. It helped push command and control into the computer age. SAGE brought radar data together, processed it quickly, and displayed a shared picture of the airspace that could support interception and coordination. This was no longer just a bigger map room, because the map itself was starting to think. And even in a machine this grand, people remained inside the loop. Operators, controllers, and commanders still had to decide what the picture meant and what action it justified. It was also enormous. Early computing sometimes approached elegance by first becoming architecture. The deeper change was cultural as much as technical. Institutions were learning to trust machine-assisted pictures of reality quickly enough to act on them, not merely archive them. As computers, sensors, satellites, and networks improved, command and control widened again. The goal was no longer merely to send orders, but to build shared situational awareness across larger and faster-moving systems. Joint doctrine uses the term common operational picture for a shared display of relevant information that helps multiple commands plan and understand the same situation. The phrase sounds clinical, but the ambition behind it is ancient. Help more than one part of a force see clearly at once. That promise is powerful, but fragile. A common picture is useful only if the information inside it is timely, relevant, and trusted. Modern doctrine also keeps returning to a humbling truth. A command and control system is not just hardware, but an arrangement of people, processes, networks, and command posts. That matters because every improvement still had to pass through training, language, trust, procedure, and the very old human talent for misunderstanding a perfectly good briefing. In current US Army thinking, mission command means giving subordinates enough authority and understanding to act in a decentralized way when the situation demands it. Strong command and control is not the same thing as micromanagement. Often, the people closest to the problem have to move before perfect instructions arrive. The best systems let them do that without losing the larger purpose. So the modern story does not end with a glowing screen and universal certainty. It ends where the old story always ended, with people trying to understand enough, fast enough, to do the right very next thing. That is why the history of command and control is more human than it first appears. On the surface, it is a story about flags, telegraphs, radios, radar, computers, and networks. But beneath that, it is a story about how people learn to share attention across distance. The question never really changed. How do you act coherently when no single person can see the whole field? The answer was never one invention. It was a link between sensing and judgment, between information and trust, between the center and the edge. The pattern kept repeating through every era: semaphore arms on hills, wire across battlefields, filter rooms, and giant computers. Each one tried to solve the same problem: see sooner, understand faster, act together. The best command and control systems did not make people unnecessary. They gave people a better chance to be timely, informed, and coordinated before the window closed. That may be the deepest truth in the whole story. Power grows more complex, but clarity remains precious. And maybe that is why this subject still matters now. Every age invents new tools, but the question underneath them barely changes. We want to know what is happening, what matters, and what must be done before hesitation becomes loss. Command and control is the long history of building that link. From signals on the horizon to pictures shared across the world, the link endured. You're always welcome here, and remember, it's Illumentary.